again, everybody. It is time for the Silver Bullets podcast. I am Michael Citro.
And I'm Chip Minnick.
Chip, we've made it through the off season. We are back to weekly editions of the Silver Bullets podcast. It didn't seem to drag out as long as it usually does for me. How about you?
I'd say it felt about the same. Maybe it's just because with so much going on the personal front with kids getting back to school and all that. I mean, it's just kind of my focus on when college football was going to begin was somewhat diverted just with all those other things I just mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've had a very busy summer, so it's been crazy. As you know, I'm also a soccer blogger, and I had a very busy summer with the Women's World Cup and the Gold Cup and all the regular Major League Soccer stuff, and so it was very, very busy. So maybe that's why it didn't seem to take as long for college football to return. And of course, we're still, as we record this, we're a little bit over a week away from seeing the Buckeyes back in action, but college football returns this weekend with a couple of games, including one here in the town where I live, which is Orlando, Florida, with the Miami Hurricanes and Florida Gators getting after it. It should be a fun opening day for college football with a game like that on the docket.
I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a good barometer game, if you will, for Florida in terms of is Dan Mullen getting that team back into SEC, at least SEC East contention. I'm not going to go that far and say that the Florida Gators could possibly win the conference, but I think he has certainly taken that program in a positive direction. And as far as the Miami Hurricanes go, the reason I use the phrase barometer for them as well is because they have a brand new coach, brand new quarterback, and I know we'll talk about that in greater detail. And it'll be interesting to see if the Hurricanes can try to get back to when they were one of the most dominant teams in the country.
Well, whenever you're talking about the Hurricanes, you're always going to talk about the barometer, Chip, as you know.
Yes.
But yes, you're right. I can't just go down the road and see Tate Martell starting a college football game because Tate Martell did not win the starting job for Miami, and so boy, is his face red at this point.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, it's a cautionary tale, I think, to just about any other player across the country who was highly recruited and has been told throughout his respective athletic career how wonderful and superior he is. And the realization that at the college level, there are so many other players who are just as talented, if not more so. They're faster, stronger, taller, and that's not meant as a slight against Tate Martell, but the reality is that he certainly had some things that were going against him no matter where he decided to play college football. So the reason I refer to that as a cautionary tale is that if he had stuck it out at Ohio State, the probability that he would be second on the depth chart here and potentially one play away if something were to happen to Justin Fields, I'm sure that has to be crossing his mind.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit because as we record this on Monday, the 19th of August, the Ohio State just named Justin Fields the starter for opening day today. It is not inconceivable that had Tate Martell not jumped ship, he could have actually been the starter a week from Saturday.
I agree with that. I also think, say what you will about Ryan Day, the way that he handled that, I give Ryan Day positive marks in the sense that when he saw the opportunity to add a talent like Justin Fields, he did not hesitate. And to your point that Tate Martell could have won the job, I mean, I think that speaks, Tate Martell, I'm not sure how much Ryan Day or the other coaches actively tried to keep Tate Martell a part of the Buckeye family, but if anything, he should have really contemplated the idea that, I already know this offense, which is something that he had claimed prior to the official announcement of Justin Fields enrolling at Ohio State.
Mm-hmm.
So he had familiarity with the offense. He had familiarity with Ryan Day. He had familiarity with a lot of the wide receivers and running backs on the team. So you're right. I think the possibility that he could have become the starter is going to be there. We'll never know. Maybe we weren't privy to those conversations about what was said behind closed doors to Tate Martell about what the coaches thought of him or what role they envisioned for him. But I certainly believe that if he had stayed, at worst, he would have been second on the depth chart going into the season opener against Florida Atlantic.
Certainly, we don't know what a Tate Martell Justin Fields quarterback battle would have looked like through the spring and into fall camp. That's really the thing about it, is we'll never know what that would have looked like. But we do know that whether it was a political thing or whether it was just to put people off as long as possible, we do know that Justin Fields didn't get named starter till today. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that someone who had been in the system for as long as Tate Martell had been, that he may have demonstrated a better grasp of the offense to the point where he was a viable option to be that starting quarterback on opening day, even if Justin Fields at some point supplanted him during the season.
And as far as Justin Fields not being named until today, and I know that there were a lot of Ohio State fans kind of wringing their hands about why is it taking so long, and all of these negative thoughts. I kind of looked at it from the idea that Ryan Day wanted to push Justin Fields. Everything that I've read is that in the last week to 10 days that Justin Fields, his performance on the field has become much more consistent than it was previously. And I think from a psychological aspect for the entire coaching, for the entire team, I should say, that I think it would have been entirely negative on the entire team if Justin Fields had just been announced as the starter, no matter that he is superior to Chris Chuganoff and Gunnar Hoke. And I think that's still up in the air, to be candid. I think that there hasn't really been a clear set delineation of who's the second string, who's the third string. I think the idea that Justin Fields, no matter that he was highly regarded as a recruit and very athletically talented, that they wanted to not only push him to improve since he enrolled at Ohio State, but also to make him earn his position in the eyes of not only the coaching staff, but also his new teammates.
Certainly, that's you always think about the psychological part of it, and it could have just been evident all along, and Ryan Day just put this off for motivational reasons. But we don't know. We're not in the meetings with the coaches. They won't invite us, Chip. I've asked, but they won't bring us in and let us know what's going on. But you can envision that was the case, and certainly it would be logical. It is a little worrisome that Chris Chuganoff and Gunnar Hoke have not produced a clear-cut second-string quarterback at this point. Although Gunnar Hoke only having been here for 15 practices, it's maybe not that surprising, and it may be again just a case of we want this guy to work harder to officially name him that number 2 quarterback.
And I think it's going to be interesting on the 31st when Ohio State plays Florida Atlantic. We talked about this previously, but it's going to be a fine balancing line from many perspectives that Justin Fields lacks experience. I mean, he played sparingly as a true freshman in Georgia last year, but quite commonly was used as kind of like a gimmick offensive weapon. by Georgia wasn't really called upon to carry the offense, for the entirety of a game. So you want to get Justin Fields as much playing time experience as possible. By the same token, in the event that we've talked about it, and I don't want to jinx it or anything, but by the same token, Justin Fields, if he were to suffer an injury, now you're left with two quarterbacks who also have minimal playing experience, Chris Chuganoff and Gunnar Hoke from when they arrived here. They really haven't been called upon to do too much, besides I think like last year Chris Chuganoff was in for a series and handed the ball off against Rutgers. I don't think he even attempted a pass during the 2018 season. So it's going to be kind of weighing the inexperience of Justin Fields, trying to get him as much playing time as possible, but you also need to get playing time for your inexperienced backups. And then last and certainly not least, Justin Fields, you don't want him to get hurt. It's going to kind of also impact how much they're going to run him with the spread zone read, which is something that he has the capability of being dynamic, and he has the athletic ability to carry the ball. But I'm sure that Ryan Day and the other coaches will be just kind of grimacing anytime that he takes a hit, because it's, like there's not much behind him. So, I mean, there's a lot of different facets to Justin Fields. I don't want to put too much pressure on the young man, because he's certainly going to be feeling that enough when the season starts. But those are the kind of things that I would just surmise that the coaching staff, if there are worries, is the quarterback depth chart is very inexperienced, and does not have a tremendous amount of depth behind it. So Justin Fields, you can't wrap him in bubble wrap or anything like that, but I'm sure that they're going to be trying to tell him, hey, when you get positive yards and you're near the sideline, make sure you get out. Don't discretion is the better part of valor, so they say. So kind of don't look to lower your shoulder and take on a 240-pound linebacker or something. We'll get that yard another way, and get out of bounds and slide and do all those things that will preserve your health.
And slide better than Dwayne Haskins, please, Justin.
I'm sure he will. I'm sure he will.
So here's the thing. I guess the ideal opening day for Justin Fields would be Ohio State gets a decent-sized lead, and then maybe he plays a series in the third quarter, maybe hits his last 5 passes and scores a touchdown, and then goes off feeling good about himself. That would be the perfect opening day as far as Ryan Day is concerned, where it pertains to Justin Fields, is that he gets the big lead, he goes off with some confidence, he goes off healthy, and then he can get snaps for Chris Chuganoff and also Gunnar Hoke. So can you think of a better start that Ryan Day would want for his quarterbacks?
No, I mean that's the ideal scenario, is that Ohio State has that comfortable lead, like you said, maybe a series into the third quarter, and Justin Fields is looking spectacular, and Ohio State has this big lead, and all right, we're gonna, after, like you said, 5 consecutive passes, which results in a touchdown, we're gonna get the other guys some playing time because we have another big game next week against Cincinnati, and we need to make sure that they are prepared, because the Cincinnati game, I am extremely confident that Luke Fickell and Marcus Freeman are going to do anything and everything they possibly can. They're going to pull out all the defensive stops, if you will, to try to confuse and intimidate Justin Fields. So I'd feel certainly much more confident if Justin Fields, like you said, he finished off Florida Atlantic with those 5 consecutive completions and a touchdown, and all right, he can go to the sideline and drink water or Gatorade or both, and just we can take it on cruise control from the third quarter on.
Yeah, you can get some mental reps watching the other guys play.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So one of the things, and of course we'll talk more about it next week as we lead into our first Ohio State game week, is that the reshuffled offensive line is going to have to keep him upright. They're going to have to keep Justin Fields protected because it's not just the designed runs. It's that Justin Fields, if he doesn't see anything downfield or if he feels pressure, he's going to get extra runs in that way as well. So that's something that Ohio State needs to be cognizant of, and hopefully the offensive line will hold up against FAU.
Yeah, and for everything that I've been reading, not just from the Ozone, but just kind of in general about Ohio State football this summer, is that Greg Studrawa is very pleased with the development of the offensive line. That I realize this is not the correct term since we're talking about football, but for lack of a better word, they have Thayer Munford kind of on a pitch count in terms of his reps at left tackle, and they are seemingly very confident that in the event that Thayer Munford is unavailable, that Josh Alabi could fill in capably. That I'm drawing a blank in terms of Jonah Jackson at left guard has come in and asserted himself very well. That in terms of I think the only position that might be open still is at right tackle. I think that's still kind of ongoing between Brandon Bowen and Nicholas Petit Frere. But I think Wyatt Davis and I'm drawing a blank in terms of at the center position. And I know he's done extremely well this summer. And going further, that they have other people that have kind of emerged along the way that they, like Harry Miller, a true freshman, is already in the two deep. So it sounds like they're going to really do everything they can to kind of make sure that they not only have a solid starting five, but also I think up to like eight guys that they feel comfortably playing at any time.
Yeah. So I am looking forward to next week till we get to really get into it, and maybe we'll break down the positions a little bit now that we know a lot more about it, and maybe we'll also give some seasonal predictions. I think that would be fun. But for now, as we still have no Buckeye football this week, we can talk about other things that are related to Buckeye football, and of course we have been talking about quarterbacks. And one of the things I thought was interesting, Chip, was that, speaking of a guy who could have maybe stayed and been in the mix for starter, we talked about Tate Martell, but also Matthew Baldwin, who transferred to TCU, but the NCAA says he's not eligible to play for TCU this year. So, good job. You're not homesick. You get to go back to Texas. Bad news is you're not going to play any football this year.
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of mind-boggling the rationale that the NCAA uses with this guy's allowed to play, this guy isn't. Matthew Baldwin, I mean, I know we're talking about somebody who went through spring football, and as you mentioned a moment ago, that homesickness was alluded to as being a probable reason why he chose to return to Texas and selected TCU. But we mentioned a few moments ago when we were talking about Tate Martell that Matthew Baldwin he has to be in the back of his mind thinking the same exact thing, that if he had stuck it out, because during the spring he was in competition with Justin Fields, that if he had stuck it out, kind of what you were mentioning about Tate Martell, that realistically that maybe Matthew Baldwin would have done enough to have shown that he was worthy of this being the starter instead of Justin Fields. At worst, a play away from being able to be a contributor this year. So I think both Matthew Baldwin and Tate Martell, there has to be some buyer's remorse in the decision that they made. It's very easy for me to sit here and say what I would do if I was a talented college football player, but I've always, in the back of my mind, I've always thought that during the recruiting process, you would think that if not a parent, a coach, somebody that is hopefully a little bit older and a little bit wiser, sits down with any young man, regardless of what position they're playing, and say something to the effect of, you've decided to go to Ohio State. What do you do if you suffer an injury and cannot play football again? Or, best case scenario, if you go to Ohio State and you find yourself buried on the depth chart and you're not really going to play, is Ohio State still the school that you would select? And I think that would make things so much better. I understand all these guys want to play. They feel that they're good enough to play because they were recruited, and I understand that. But at some point, you have to kind of think, all right, I really want to stick it out. The value of an Ohio State education, the contacts that you make, all those kind of things, those are also things to be considered and not necessarily just kind of arbitrarily dismissed.
Well, Chip, I wish somebody had given me this advice that I'm about to give before, it was too late. And that advice is never leave Ohio State. Never, ever, 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 ever leave Ohio State. Just stay as long as you can, as Billy Madison once said.
Yes.
I mean, there's no better place on the planet. So just stay there. That's where everybody should be. And it's a great place to be. So, yeah, I was there a lot longer than most of the athletes that come through Ohio State. Not just the ones that leave early, but also the fifth-year players, the guys that got 2 medical red shirts, a regular red shirt, and a medical red shirt. I took the long route, but it was not long enough. I could still be there today if I had played my cards right. So, but I do know what the NCAA's doing. I know what their criteria are for whether or not a player who transfers out of Ohio State can be eligible to play. And that criteria consists of, if you're going to a team that's going to play against Ohio State, you are immediately eligible, so you can help that team. If you're going somewhere where they are not playing Ohio State, then you're not eligible.
Seems plausible to me.
That seems to be the rule. Keandre Jones going to Maryland, Blue Smith going to Cincinnati. They're both eligible to play against the Buckeyes this fall.
And it's going to be out of the players that you just mentioned. I think Keandre Jones, in his defense, I think the fact that he either graduated or was on track to graduate, I can't recall what he played so sparingly that I think going back home to Maryland and the opportunity to play, I think that might have been a factor, but I couldn't begin to tell you what the rationale was in granting Blue Smith his immediate eligibility, unless it was, as you said, the fact that Cincinnati's going to be playing Ohio State in week 2.
Yeah, just help Luke Fickell out. Give him another weapon. Why not? A kid, kind of, but we will see how that plays out this fall. We'll see if Keandre Jones and Blue Smith get some snaps against the Buckeyes, and we'll see what they do with them. Chip, other news that came out: the captains have been named for Ohio State football for the 2019 football season, and the Buckeyes have a lot of captains, and this seems to concern a lot of people online who like to get mad about things online. Too many captains. It's 4 defensive players and 3 offensive players. The captains are Jordan Fuller. That makes sense. Jordan Fuller makes a lot of sense. Tough Borland, again, that's something that you probably could have predicted. KJ Hill is an obvious choice. Chase Young, another pretty good choice. You figure he's probably going pro after this year, so a good opportunity for him to step in. And then maybe some less obvious choices. I think the next sort of strong choice be J.K. Dobbins. You might expect that as well. Again, this could be his last year at Ohio State. And then Jonathan Cooper and C.J. Saunders being the other captains, not quite as obvious choices.
I agree. I think Jonathan Cooper. It would have been somewhat of a surprise because I think a lot of the speculation that Jonathan Cooper was going to be one of the captains based on his trip to Chicago with the Big Ten Media Days,
Mm-hmm.
like everyone else that you mentioned with so Jonathan Cooper, yeah, he's not nearly as flashy of a defensive end as some of the players who have preceded him, but I think there's something to be said about a guy who, he's a local product. He, is kind of, he's been a very good contributor when given the opportunity to play. So I think that might be kind of he might be one of those guys that truly leads by example that
Mm-hmm.
we don't see behind the scenes. And as far as C.J. Saunders, I think that is I think I saw the video clip of Coach Day introducing the captains, and he even said something along the lines of, "This is really cool that C.J. Saunders garnered enough votes to be considered and worthy of being named one of the 9 captains." So, excuse me, 7 captains. I was thinking of last year.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now, as far as that kind of leads me into my other point, and for the people who take strong objection to the number of captains, that keep in mind this is based on the number of votes that the players received. So it's not as though that I'm just guessing here that the coaching staff is actively trying to get as many players to be captains as much as these are the players that the team have determined speak for them in a leadership capacity. So from what I read online, that I guess there was a clear delineation between those players that would have been like the 8th or 9th or something. That's why they only have 7.
Mm-hmm.
So in future years, for those people who are concerned about this, keep in mind it's all based on the player votes, and leadership is something that I would rather have in strong abundance rather than not enough. And for a first-year head coach, I think Ryan Day has a group of young men serving as captains that will help him, take the program in the direction that he wants to take it.
I don't really get bent out of shape about the number of captains. I don't think there's a set number that is better than any other number. I mean, how do you feel about that?
It's not so much. I mean, I guess, like I said, like the 9 seemed kind of abnormal last year. I thought that was just kind of seemingly, unnecessary. I don't really, like you said, I don't really get bent out of shape as much, when it's based on the fact that the players are the ones voting. I think Urban Meyer, just to kind of put it in a different perspective, he said years ago that it bothered him that more players weren't being named captains. So that's the only part that I would kind of politely disagree with him, is that, well, I think, that a player being named captain is, something that, okay, are they worthy of that distinction?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not really concerned so much about the number of captains as much as, okay, are these players really worthy of that honorable accolade? Like, this is something that Ryan Day said in connection with the announcement that they flashed to a wall within the Woody Hayes Athletic Center that identifies the captains who have played there throughout the years, and how so many of them are among some of the finest players to have ever contributed to the program. And so it's something that when you think back to, there are other guys, like I think back to at the tail end of the John Cooper era, Kenyon Rambo was a captain and wasn't necessarily well respected by all of his teammates. So it's you know what I mean? Like I'm not trying to take.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. I think I'm agreeing with what I hear you trying to say, which is some years there are going to be fewer guys who are really worthy and deserving captains. Some years there'll be more. but there's not any one particular number that's better than any other number. It would be weird if you had 20, and
Right.
it would be weird if you had one. But basically, anything in between just about is fine as long as those players are worthy of that title.
I completely agree.
So if you're bent out of shape because there are 7 captains, you know, have a beer and
Yeah.
just maybe think about all the other things that are more important to be upset about, like who has the best chicken sandwich.
Okay. There
That
you have it.
seems to be a hot topic on Twitter today. So, yeah, I think looking at these names, I think it's pretty good, a pretty good group of guys. I think that you know C.J. Saunders is a guy we hear the coaches talk about a lot, and so obviously he's very well respected in the program. Hasn't really shown on the field, some of the things that maybe you'd like to see from your captain. Just out there excelling play after play after play. And I think you could say maybe a little bit about the same about Jonathan Cooper, who has not had he's had an okay career. He just hasn't had like it hasn't been Bosa-esque for Jonathan
No.
Cooper,
Well,
and not
but
not that
most
that's a fair comparison or anything, but
right, right,
so there's
right.
those guys, and then there's other guys who on this list where, of course, Jordan Fuller's had a good career. J.K. Dobbins had a little bit of a down year last year, but of course a tremendous freshman season, and he has a chance this year to really move up the ranks in all-time rushing. Chase Young, everybody expects a big year out of him, even though he's almost sure to be double and triple teamed a lot. Tough Borland, your starting linebacker for a couple of years. You're going to be a captain at Ohio State if you're a starting middle linebacker for a few years at Ohio State. And KJ Hill, man, I mean, he's got a chance to be the next Mike Doss. To decide to come back against what expectations were and maybe win a national championship.
And KJ Hill is within reasonable striking distance of becoming the all-time leading receiver in Ohio State history. I think that certainly played a part in his desire to come back. And as far as getting back to C.J. Saunders, I think in his case, yeah, he's not going to be one of those guys who I think, even the most diehard fan of Ohio State is going to, when they start talking about the wide receiver rotation, yes, he's in there, but he's not. I mean, he's not mentioned in the same breath as a KJ Hill, a Chris Olave, a Garrett Wilson, like all these other guys that, Benjamin Victor, all these other players that's who the fans are expecting to see. I think his contributions have to come probably when on special teams units, as well as when he does in practice situations, being among the leaders in terms of being the first to volunteer for drills or those kind of things. And that I think that there's a value to that. And I'm happy for the young man because he certainly a couple years ago, I think it was against UNLV, was kind of when he first had the opportunity to start getting some playing time. And that's when Urban Meyer kind of just, I don't want to say that he rolled his eyes, but just kind of implied, all right, this is a guy that, he's not big enough or something like that. And, like people like you and I were the ones that are kind of thinking like, oh, this guy could totally be playing for the New England Patriots or something, like that kind of thing. Cause he's that kind of a receiver, but I think it's going to be interesting to see how much playing time he gets, even though he is a captain. I don't think Ryan Day is going to necessarily elevate him in terms of playing time simply because of his status as a captain. So I think, sometimes leadership can manifest itself in a variety of different ways, things that the average fan doesn't necessarily see or hear, but things that are happening behind closed doors as well as on the secluded practice fields. C.J. Saunders, that might be where and how he earned his captaincy.
Absolutely, and I look forward to seeing how all of the captains perform this year. Chip, you and I talked about maybe some potential topics for this week's show, because we do have college football returning, but not necessarily Ohio State. We did get a lot of news out of camp, and we've talked about quite a bit of it already. But one of the things that we probably won't discuss next week, so I think it's important to maybe touch on this week, is that other half of the Big Ten, that half that's over in the West. And we haven't, we really haven't handicapped the Big Ten overall, and that's kind of not really something I'm that interested in doing. But I do think it's important to look across the aisle, as it were, and to see who's looming out there, that if Ohio State has another good season and goes to Indianapolis at the end of the year, who might be the team on the other sideline. And so, do you have any predictions on who might win the Big Ten West Division in 2019? Are we going to get a surprise? Are we going to get a new face in there? Are we going to see, maybe the return of Wisconsin? How do you see this shaping up?
Good question. I'm not sure how much this would be categorized as a surprise, because I know that a lot of other individuals and publications have predicted this team. But I'm going to suggest that Nebraska is going to be the team that winds up winning the Big Ten West. And my rationale for it, besides the fact that Scott Frost had Nebraska playing well down the stretch, as Ohio State fans should hopefully remember being fortunate to escape with a 5-point win last year when Nebraska came to town. And I'm also a big believer in Adrian Martinez, and I know that the Nebraska defense has to improve dramatically. My reasoning, as I started thinking about, all right, the Big Ten West, and this is meant with no disrespect towards Wisconsin or Iowa or Northwestern, which was the team that won the Big Ten West last year. I've even heard some people say keep an eye out on Minnesota, because the talent level that PJ Fleck has accumulated is getting better and better. But I think a major reason why Nebraska could wind up winning the Big Ten West is, unlike some of those other teams that I mentioned, Wisconsin, Iowa, Northwestern, I think Nebraska's schedule sets itself up better, in the sense that the only Big Ten East team that Nebraska has to play that's kind of, considered a powerhouse, if you will, is Ohio State. When you look at Iowa, they have to play, Penn State and Michigan. Wisconsin has to play Ohio State and Michigan. Northwestern, I'm not entirely sure off the top of my head, but they're playing Ohio State, and they also have a very tough non-conference schedule. I think their first game of the season actually is against, I think at Stanford. So
yes, but Northwestern, that will not count against their conference record, so they could still win the West.
That's true. I just think Nebraska's schedule is going to be the difference maker for them. I think that's going to be enough to get. I don't know. I'm not going to be so bold as to kind of go out and say like what their final record is. That's not what I would suggest, though, is that I think the schedule, the way that it lays out for Nebraska, is going to play a key part in Nebraska being able to win the Big Ten West.
Mm-hmm. So I've thought a little bit about this, Chip. And Northwestern last year in conference play went 8-1 to win the West, and no one else did better than 4 losses. Everybody else had at least 4 losses on the year. I noticed that you didn't put Lovie Smith's Illinois Fighting Illini in amongst the challengers.
No, unfortunately, I think this might be. I think Illinois, and I apologize for this horrible pun, but I think Illinois is going to lose that Lovie feeling, sometime by the end of the 2019 season. I think it was a nice idea to try and capitalize on a coach who had reasonable success in the NFL, but I don't see it getting much better for Illinois. I think I saw some. I'm not sure what the young man's name was, but I saw something on Twitter about one of Illinois' top recruits for this year is already lost for the season due to injury. So I mean, it's just kind of adding insult to injury. I think Illinois. I think they're. If there's anything I feel extremely confident about, is that I envision Illinois being in the cellar of the Big Ten West in 2019.
So when I look at the West, and I think Northwestern at 8-1 last year was head and shoulders above the rest of the conference or the rest of the division in terms of the record, as everybody else sort of beat on each other and Northwestern sort of squeaked by everybody. Who would that next challenge come from Northwestern? And Nebraska was 3-6, one of two teams that went 3-6, along with Minnesota. Then there were three teams that were 5-4: Iowa, Wisconsin, and Purdue. Now Purdue is a team that certainly has maybe the most unique talent in the league with Rondale Moore.
Mm-hmm.
And so they can, you never know. If he just goes crazy, they could beat anybody. Look at the way he played against Ohio State. Now, given Ohio State's uncharacteristically poor defense last year, it's not that surprising maybe, but I think that this is a kid who can win games all by himself, and they're just going to keep finding ways to give him the ball. So Purdue has certainly got to be in the conversation, I think. Iowa won its last 3 games of last year. They have the longest current winning streak in the Western Division, and the second longest streak in all of the Big Ten. Ohio State won its last 6 after the debacle against Purdue. So I think Iowa and Purdue are going to give Nebraska a run for their money. Now, Iowa did lose some key players, but they were all tight ends, and they're going to have a bunch more tight ends this year because that's what happens at Iowa. You might go there to be a defensive lineman, but you're going to be a tight end before you leave. So I don't know. I don't believe in Paul Chryst enough to pick Wisconsin. I don't know that Pat Fitzgerald can keep the Wildcats at the level they were at last year. I think they'll be in the mix. I do expect Minnesota to get better. I don't know if they're going to make the jump to that next tier. So I think that really the West comes down to Northwestern, Purdue, Iowa, Nebraska. That group of 4. And it could be any one of them. I don't even know if I can make a pick here. I think if I have to make a pick, I'm going to say, maybe Nebraska comes up just short, and maybe this is another year for Kirk Ferentz to get a Coach of the Year trophy and win 9 or 10 games and get Iowa to the Big Ten championship game, maybe, just based on the fact that it just seems to happen every couple of years.
Yeah.
But Purdue is a team that certainly could surprise some people. 5-4 last year in the conference, 6-7 overall. They were a bowl team. They had a very emotional season. It's kind of hard to figure how much of their success last year was tied to the emotional, connection that they had to one specific fan, Tyler Trent. I believe was the young man's last name. I'm terrible with names. I'm sure you can correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you got it. You got it.
But I don't know how much that had to do with how they did last year, and I certainly think that emotion led them to do things against Ohio State that they wouldn't ordinarily do. Not necessarily on offense, because again, Ohio State's defense was terrible. But I didn't think the Purdue's defense could do that to Ohio State's offense, and so I think certainly emotion played a big role there. Northwestern is going to get Ohio State at home at night, I believe.
Yes.
I believe that's correct. So again, that's a game you're going to have to watch out for that one. But I do think it comes down to those Northwestern, Purdue, Iowa, Nebraska, and although I think Nebraska's kind of the sexy pick because of Scott Frost, I still think maybe they're 1 year away, and so I will give it to Iowa. Just because Kirk Ferentz never seems to be down for very long. And not that they were very down last year, but in that West that anybody could win it, Kirk Ferentz usually finds a way to do that when there's not a real clear-cut winner.
I find no fault in your logic, and for what it's worth, when you said that you were terrible with names, for whatever reason, the mind block that I had for the young man who's scheduled to play center for Ohio State, Josh Myers. I don't know why that escaped my mind earlier when we were talking about the offensive line. And I know that we're going to talk about Ohio State in much greater detail next week when we talk about the various positions and things like that. But yeah, I think Iowa is a good choice. Like I can't remember Nebraska's Big Ten East crossovers, with the exception just because Ohio State's on there. Like as you said, I know that Northwestern. I'm not sure besides who they have for Ohio State. I just knew that Iowa. I know for a fact that they're playing Michigan and Penn State, which kind of impacted my decision. But I certainly find no fault in your logic. I think Kirk Ferentz has demonstrated in his tenure at Iowa that his teams, no matter how many tight ends they lose to the NFL, that he always has players ready to go at that position. And he does have a senior quarterback in Nate Stanley. So it certainly makes a lot of sense for Iowa to be a potential Big Ten West champion.
The Wildcats, Chip, will go to Michigan State, and they will go to Indiana.
Okay.
So that's, I mean, they could beat Michigan State, and they certainly could beat Indiana. So that sets up pretty well in their favor. Of course, Nebraska hosts Ohio State, and they also host Indiana. That should be an easy win for them, I figure. And they go to Maryland.
Okay.
So I don't think either Northwestern or Nebraska have terribly difficult crossovers, although they both play Ohio State, but they both play them at home.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't even bother looking up Illinois.
That's understandable.
All right. Do you think we'll talk more about the Big Ten East, I think, next week, but do you think that the Big Four are going to stay the Big Four? Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Michigan State. That's your top four in the East.
In that sequence, or
not necessarily in the order, but those four in some order. Those four are going to be the top four teams in the East.
I do. I think for all of the ridicule levied at Mark D'Antonio for what he did with his offensive coaching staff, that he didn't fire anyone, he just had them reassigned to a different position. So I've heard the analogies often made of like kind of reshuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic kind of analogy that I think is overlooked. A couple things are overlooked about Michigan State, and that is first and foremost how tenacious that defense was and is for Michigan State. And say what you will about Mark D'Antonio, I mean, Michigan State defensively is usually very, very tough, as Ohio State fans have grown accustomed to seeing whenever Ohio State and Michigan State have played over the last several years. That's the first point. Mm-hmm. So I think that the defense is exceptionally strong. The second thing, and this is just something that it's easy to kind of dismiss, but I think it really did play a part in the offensive woes, and that is the injury that Brian Lewerke sustained at quarterback. That kind of, granted, yeah, they were already kind of in a bad situation prior to the injury, but I think as soon as Brian Lewerke was effectively done for the season, it just kind of made Michigan State even that much more one-dimensional and predictable. And so everything I have read is that Lewerke's finally 100% healthy, and now if he remains that, we'll have to see. But I think a healthy Brian Lewerke and the traditionally strong defense under Mark D'Antonio, I think that's going to keep the Spartans in the Big Four, as you referred to them. I think Penn State, the talent is there. Now they've lost a ton at quarterback with like the fact that all right now they're no different than Ohio State. I mean, in the sense that they're completely inexperienced at that position, but the talent that they've been accumulating in the recruiting battles, and the reason I can say this is a lot of the players on that Penn State roster They chose to go to Penn State instead of Ohio State. Ohio State wanted them just as badly as Penn State. The only difference is the Nittany Lions were able to convince them to go there. So the talent's not, going to be an issue. It just really depends on how quickly they can come together at the quarterback position. And I think the biggest home game that Penn State gets is I think they get Michigan there. I think that's their whiteout game.
They
it hasn't
do.
been officially
October 19th. Their crossovers are at Minnesota, at Iowa, home to Purdue.
Okay, so I have no idea in terms of the game at Iowa. I know Penn State has. I mean, Iowa and Ohio State can't gloat too much. Iowa's been a place that Big Ten East teams have seen their seasons go awry. It happened to Penn State before. It's happened to Michigan. It happened to Ohio State. So I think that'll certainly play a factor. But I think the talent is there for Penn State. As far as the Wolverines, I think I'm going to be in that camp of I need to see it before I believe it. And what I'm talking about is this idea that Jim Harbaugh is going to turn over the reins offensively and get out of the idea of, running the ball predominantly with fullbacks and, not allowing Shea Patterson to run a spread scheme. I want to see what they're going to be doing offensively. I think they've lost a ton of talent on defense to the NFL, and I have the utmost respect for Don Brown as a coordinator. He sounds extremely confident that the players that they have coming up through the ranks are certainly able to step in and not necessarily miss a beat. But as I said a moment ago, I'm going to be skeptical until I kind of see the results on the field. I think that week 2 game against Army is going to be something else, because that's the kind of thing where Army took Oklahoma into overtime last year. So that, just being able to go from playing maybe like a traditional 4-3 scheme and then having to play against a triple option attack that Army runs, it's easier said than done. I think that's going to play a factor. But I do think my long-winded answer to your excellent question is, I do think that the Big Four are going to remain. I'm confident that Ohio State is going to be the Big Ten East champion. I know we'll talk about it in greater detail next week, but I do think Ohio State will win the Big Ten East. I'm just not entirely sure how it's all going to shake out in spots 2, 3, and 4, but I know those teams will be there.
Yeah, Michigan's going to start out very strong. I'm not sure about the Army game. I haven't researched Army to see who they've lost, but I can tell you they can probably devote some time to Army, even in the lead up to Middle Tennessee, because it's Middle Tennessee. Probably don't have to take them too awful seriously. But Michigan's crossovers are not that difficult. They do go to Wisconsin September 21st when they could be still nursing some wounds. They do get a bye week after Army, and then they'll go to Wisconsin. Then they also have to go to Illinois. That should be easy. And they have I lost track of their other one. Iowa at home. So if that was on the road, that would be a difficult game. I think they're probably going to be able to win that one. But for me, Michigan needs to stay healthy, because I don't think they have the depth, especially on that defense and on the defensive line. And if they lose some defensive linemen and the defensive line is an issue for them, that could implode their season in a hurry.
And I think Tom Orr and Tony Gerdeman on their podcast, when they did a really good job, I mean, as usual, but they had a podcast recently where they kind of just started going position by position, comparing and contrasting what Michigan has to what Ohio State has. And for all of the concerns that I have, and I'm sure others have, about the Ohio State quarterback position, as you said, they talked about the lack of depth along the defensive line, the lack of depth at running back. is something to be concerned about if you're a Wolverines fan. So you're right. I think I'm still kind of wondering, what possessed people like Phil Steele to predict Michigan is going to win the Big Ten East. In my opinion, all the pressure's on Michigan. Ohio State's not Ohio State has won so many for so many years. 7 straight. And the depth of talent that Ohio State has, I think, not only this year, but in coming years with the recruiting rankings that you see. And I realize it's a very unscientific thing. It kind of begs the question, okay, if Jim Harbaugh doesn't win the game this year, when is he ever going to?
Yeah, if he doesn't win it this year at home with a returning quarterback against a player, a quarterback who's playing in his first iteration of the game on the road, when is he going to do it? No Urban Meyer. So you're right. There is some pressure on Michigan, especially if they go into that game undefeated. There's absolutely no reason that he can give to lose that game if he goes into that game unbeaten, because the expectations are going to be very, very high. There's going to be a lot of pressure on him.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So next week, you and I will think about it during the week. We'll rank our Big Ten East teams.
Okay.
And we'll compare our notes.
Okay, that sounds like a worthwhile project to undertake, to kind of scrutinize the Big Ten East.
Yeah, I'm anxious to get in there and look a little deeper at the cross divisional rivalries and what what those look like and how those are going to shake out. I know, you obviously know Indiana always plays Purdue. Protected rivalry, so we'll see how it all shakes up. We'll kind of go through, and then maybe at the end of the year we'll see who came closer to predicting the Big Ten East. And it's probably going to be a mess, but I think you and I are probably in agreement that the top 4 and the bottom 3 are going to be the same in terms of which teams they are, but maybe not necessarily what order we put them in.
I think that's a very accurate assessment.
All right, Chip. So I think by this time next week, we might have some idea of the depth charts for opening day. We'll get that at some point next week. But in the meantime, we don't necessarily have that, but I think we have a pretty good idea of who the starters are. So maybe we can pick a player on offense and defense that we think might be a sleeper that will emerge as a big-time performer for the 2019 Buckeyes.
Okay, so do you want me to go first, or do you want to go first?
Let's start on the defensive side of the ball, and you can go first, and then when we do offense, I'll go first. That way it'll be fair.
Okay, all right. So I gave it some thought, and as you said, we don't know the depth chart per se. We don't have any idea in terms of who's lining up with the first team, the second team. We have a pretty good idea in terms of, like, for example, Jordan Fuller is going to start at safety, and Brendan White is going to be playing the bullet and possibly lining up at safety and all these other things. And I kind of struggled with this because there's so much talent on the defensive side of the ball, but the guy that I think who could emerge as a player who may not necessarily start, but will be a contributor just simply because I think as it gets closer and closer into conference play along the defensive line, I'm going to go with Tommy Togiai on the defensive line, simply because everything that you read about him, the players, when asked who's the strongest guy on the team, almost to a man, all say Tommy Togiai. And at defensive line, specifically the interior defensive line, I think he's going to play a big part when it comes to some of those teams that we were talking about that Ohio State has to play, Wisconsin, Michigan State, teams that like to run the ball. I think Tommy Togiai is going to be one of those guys who, if not necessarily as a starter, is going to be a a big-time contributor this year for Ohio State on the defensive line.
All right, Chip, that's the last time I let you go first.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yes, I was going to pick Tommy Togiai, but since you picked him, I'm going to change my pick just to be sporting.
Okay.
I definitely expect some big things out of Tommy Togiai for all of the reasons that you outlined. He's got really good speed. He's extremely strong. And I just don't think they're going to be able to keep him off the field. I think he's one of those players that, especially in the second half of games, is going to get in there and against a little bit more tired opponent and just eat them alive. So I expect some good things from him. I'm going to instead change to, I think we're going to see a lot of defensive backs this year. I think Josh Proctor is a guy who could step up and make some plays. But I'm going to, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that my sleeper, since you picked Tommy Togiai, is going to be someone who a lot of Ohio State fans wish would just transfer. I'm going to say that Tuff Borland has a bounce back year and impresses in 2019. The coaching staff loves him. I know that there were some eyebrows raised when Greg Madison said that Pete Werner was one of his favorite players earlier, sometime maybe middle of last week, late last week. People want to look at last year's team and say Tuff Borland and Pete Werner are not good players, not good football players. They should be playing for a MAC school or go back to high school or whatever. I maintain that you now have two different coaching staffs that think that these players are something and that they should be starting. Last year's defensive problems, clearly we know Ryan Day thought that the problems did not lie with the players, not with the personnel. It was with the coaching staff. That became evident when he picked his coaching staff. So I'm going to say that two coaching staffs can't be wrong about Tuff Borland, and he should be fully recovered from that Achilles now, and I think he'll have a big year. That's my prediction.
Well, I like it, even though I stole your guy. I like it.
Yeah.
So,
all right. So let's go to the offensive side of the football and pick our sleepers. And I was a little worried because I'm going to go first now. I was a little worried that you remembered his name because my sleeper is going to be Josh Myers. I think he's going to be the captain of that offensive line. I think he's going to lead that line to good things this year, even though they're largely a revamped bunch and you might expect some growing pains. I think we probably will see some growing pains this season, but I think Josh Myers is going to have a big year.
And the compliment about Josh Myers is that he was one of these guys who was highly touted as a recruit. And this is not meant to disparage Josh Myers, but from what I understand, in high school, his team very sparingly ever threw the ball. I think he came from an offense that was designed to run the ball almost exclusively, so that kind of hindered his on-field development. But he certainly, everything that I've read is that he is truly taken to that center position extremely well and is well positioned to kind of help lead that new offensive line. So I think it's a really good pick.
And I think I think you're going to see a big bounce back year from J.K. Dobbins in part because of Josh Myers.
Yeah, I could see it. I could see it. So speaking of J.K. Dobbins, he is. We mentioned earlier the idea of Justin Fields being able to run the ball, but J.K. Dobbins is, I think, going to be the focal point of the offense until Justin Fields gets even more acclimated as a starter and within the Ohio State offense. I think I would not be surprised to see J.K. Dobbins touch the ball in a wide variety of different ways in the first few games, while Justin Fields is kind of getting his feet wet, so to speak. But as you and I know and our listeners know, that Ohio State, you can have a phenomenal tailback, but you always need to have somebody behind that guy Uh, you don't want to run J.K. Dobbins into the ground into September because he's going to be needed for the crucial stretch run towards winning the Big Ten. And the guy that I've been hearing a lot about at the running back position, who seems to be coming on, even though he's a true freshman, I was impressed with his performance in the spring game, is true freshman Marcus Crowley.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he
He
will
had his black stripe removed. He was one of the guys who's had his black stripe gone.
certainly. So I think he is. I know that there's been some speculation as to who would be the backup, and Ryan Day doesn't sound necessarily overly enthused with where that kind of sits right now. That I think Master Teague is battling injury. I think Demario McCall is one of these guys that I think they kind of have come to the conclusion they can't wait any longer. And then now you're down to true freshman Marcus Crowley and Steel Chambers. And like Marcus Crowley, Steel Chambers also had his black stripe removed. But I'm going to give the edge to Crowley based on the fact that what I saw in the spring and just some of the scuttlebutt that has been emerging out of the camp, that I think Marcus Crowley's he'll be playing more, and I don't think he is a viable candidate for that 4-game redshirting rule that emerged last year. I think he's gonna play throughout the entire season and establish himself as that secondary running back. So that's kind of why he's my selection as a sleeper to keep an eye on for the offense.
He's a really hard runner. I mean, he's the kind of guy
Yes.
who could he could end up being that goal line vulture kind of running back.
Yes. Yeah. When he in the spring game, and you can't really get too worked up over what you see in the spring game, but just I agree with you. I think he has he squares his shoulders, and runs decisively, and has a physical sense to him, and I think that's what they need. And I'm not sure, having seen Demario McCall play in high school, I'm not sure if that's really his style. I certainly believe it's Master Teague's style, but he's battling injury, and some of the highlights that Tony Gernman posted of Steel Chambers, it looks like Steel Chambers is certainly that kind of a ball carrier. But I think Marcus Crowley, the fact that he was the Gatorade Player of the Year in Florida, he's been here as an early enrollee. I think that's going to be enough to give him the edge, and I think he's going to emerge as the second back behind J.K. Dobbins.
Well, you know that I'm here for the Steel Chambers era because of his name.
Yes, absolutely.
And he is 6'2", 215. Steel Chambers, another guy who could end up being a goal line vulture. If they feel J.K. can't get that smaller frame across the goal line amongst all those big uglies down there. But okay, that's good. We've done our due diligence on our sleepers. I think we're this is a pretty good entry into the week before the week. I think next week would be a good week to, like I said, we rank our Eastern teams. Maybe we'll pick out. I think we start a new segment this year called Pick to Click. Maybe we'll each pick someone who we think will have a big game on each side of the ball, so we can get that started, and we can maybe go game by game and sort of give our preliminary predictions. Of course, we'll give our predictions each week, but we'll give our preliminary predictions on what we expect from Ohio State over the course of the schedule. But before we get out of here today, I think the one thing left for us to talk about is what Ohio State needs to do to have a successful 2019 season. So, Chip, finish this sentence for me. Ohio State will have a successful 2019 season if blank.
If they win the Big Ten. I'm that confident in Ryan Day and the talent that Ohio State should be a contender for the Big Ten championship. I'm not going to say that if they lose the Big Ten championship game that means it's an unsuccessful season. But I think that they should be a Big Ten contender for all of the desire to be in the college football playoff. Unfortunately, those are things that are beyond the control of Ohio State coaches, players, and fans that since it's an arbitrary decision and there's no transparency into how those decisions are made. The only thing that they can control is by winning the games that they are scheduled to play. And I look at Ohio State's talent in comparison to everyone else, and there really is no reason why Ohio State should not be confident that they can emerge as Big Ten East champions for the third consecutive year with another trip to Indianapolis.
All right, so my answer to this question, Ohio State will have a successful season if it'll be the same answer I give every single year, if the Buckeyes beat Michigan, because that's really what I care about.
I understand.
As a person who grew up when I did and has had suffered through the many, many lean years of the John Cooper era, this has been a tremendous turnaround from Jim Tressel to Urban Meyer. The turnaround against that team up north has been fantastic. I want it to continue, and I think that if Ohio State can go to Michigan and beat Michigan, then I think the rest of the season will pretty much take care of itself anyway. So that's the way I would finish the sentence. Ohio State will have a successful season if the Buckeyes go to Ann Arbor and beat Michigan. And depending on what else Michigan does this year, that might be the last straw for Jim Harbaugh.
Yeah, we'll see.
I mean, if they lose to Notre Dame and Army and, maybe Wisconsin on the road or whatever, they might turn the page. I mean, there's a lot of people up there already that are kind of tired of this and
yes.
And ready for someone new. I mean, you look at what Jim Harbaugh's done at Michigan, and it hasn't been certainly what Michigan fans had hoped it would be, but I think we can all agree it's definitely not the Rich Rod era. So it's hard to say. It's hard to say what coach is out there that Michigan could bring in and replace Jim Harbaugh and do a better job. Certainly it would be, if you're looking for a Michigan man per se, that's a difficult search, I think.
Yes.
So
I agree.
All right. Well, next week, you and I, Chip, will come back. We'll do our Big Ten East rankings. We will look at each game. We'll do our picks to click, and we will get ready for the first game of Ohio State's 2019 football season.
Can't wait.
All right, Chip, where can people find you on the internet?
They can find me on Twitter at Chip Minnick, Minnich. And like Michael, I'm a contributor to the Ozone in the Hazen Cannon section. And I also am a contributor to Athlon Sports.
All right, yes, I will be returning to my grumpy old Buckeye column for the football season at theozone.net in the Hazen Cannon section. You can find me at Mike36Fan on Twitter. Please, if you have any questions for Chip or myself to answer here on the podcast, hit us up on Twitter. You can use the hashtag SBPmailbag. And we will be happy to answer any questions you have. If we don't know, we'll make it up. But you will get an answer. That I can guarantee you. All right. So I guess that'll do it, Chip. We're back in this thing. We're back to weekly podcasts. The college football season is upon us. We get a week where we don't have to really get all too wound up about Ohio State. We get a nice little break to open the season as we get to watch either Miami or Florida go down early, and and all the Schadenfreude that brings with it for those particular fan bases, and then we can get ready for Florida Atlantic.
Can't wait.
All right, so that'll do it for this edition of the Silver Bullets podcast. I guess there's nothing left to do but sign off the way we usually do by saying, "Go Bucks!"
Go Bucks!